I'm on. All right. Good morning, church. Welcome to this lecture on spiral dynamics, and if there's time, the Gospel of Matthew, the best and worst of humanity. Pop quiz to start the class, TV edition. A number of you last week, when we were talking about the Avengers, told me that you had never seen the Avengers before. Seriously, what are you doing in pandemic if you have not watched your way through the MCU? Avengers Endgame is the best-selling movie of all time, and that was your assignment in pandemic. So honestly, if you haven't watched your way through the MCU, you at least need to watch the Avengers movies. But even then, I think you'd have to go back and watch Iron Man and at least Captain America and watch their stories through. I think you could do that. That's a bare minimum. It's probably 15 movies, bare minimum. So get started on that. Today we're going to talk about a pop quiz, the TV edition. And we're going to do these rapid fire here because I've come up with a few sitcoms and my opinion about them. If you've got a strong opinion about one of your favorite TV shows, that would be great. The first one is All in the Family. Who remembers All in the Family? My clicker's not clicking. Yep, all right. Yeah, so this is my opinion of All in the Family, and once you understand spiral dynamics, I think for me, it changes the way that I live into the show, right? Spiral dynamics changes that because, of course, the word says green, but it's in red. This is what happens at 10 o'clock after a 60-hour work week or whatever. Sorry about that. I meant red. I meant red for him, right? And of course, red would call green meathead, right? Of course he would. And he's incredibly sexist and incredibly racist. This show could not air on television in this day and age. Would we agree on that? This show could not be on television. It was so groundbreaking. The number of topics that they talked about on this show was completely groundbreaking, and it explained, I think, poetically, even though they didn't know spiral dynamics, surely the writers didn't know spiral dynamics. It is a master's course in what happens when red and blue and orange and green get together. So I hope that changes the way you view it in a good way, because of course those conversations are going to continue to happen. So many classic episodes that we don't have time to talk about here, but the one where he has to get a blood transfusion from an African-American woman, and he's completely worried about it, right? So funny. He calls it my hemoglobin and her shemoglobin. Do you remember that? Such good writing of a show. I want you to notice as we talk through these sitcoms that the antagonistic character is always red. The antagonistic character in every one of these sitcoms is red in general. This is my dad's favorite show. How many of you loved MASH? I grew up as a kid watching reruns of MASH or live of MASH with my dad. And I remember falling asleep to it because he would watch it every night. And I'd go get in their bed and fall asleep and wake up in my bed somehow. Somehow somebody always got me to where I needed to go. This was also a master's class in comedy in every way. They did this. This show is amazing in its ability to be a comedy that has more serious moments that are more meaningful than most of the serious, meaningful shows. And it's because they had comedy in such a dark locale. I would have loved to have been in the pitch room when this show was pitched. We've got a comedy that's going to happen at a mobile, emergency care unit in the middle of a war in a foreign country. Such a brilliant show all the way through. I could watch MASH today. And you get Klinger, who's this green character. You got some blue. Father Mulcahy, obviously, is really wrestling. His faith journey as being a chaplain is just poetic to me because he's in blue and he's wrestling with that, and he's wrestling with how bad things can happen the whole show, and he really is a marvelous, steadfast character on what faith looks like in the midst of controversy. Hawkeye and Pierce are obviously orange. They're like making moonshine on the side, doing their own thing. This is just a great show. And remind me his name, who halfway through the show becomes their roommate. The guy that I labeled as red here. What? Frank. Yeah, Frank. Yeah, and they just don't get along at all, right? And like he's always accusing them of pulling pranks on him because basically they are. And then Klinger decides that to get out of the war, he's going to dress up as a woman. I mean, it's like this whole, like the spiral dynamic. Once you understand spiral dynamics, I feel like I'm through the matrix, right? And like you see the natural the conflicts that arise from spiral dynamics, all right? No one told you life was gonna be this way. These folks are the next generation. And so none of them are red. Do you feel that? None of them are red because they've evolved past that. But the problem is they have no idea what they're doing, right? This is a show built on coming of age and miscommunication, right? Every single episode is about miscommunication. How do they know that we know that they know that we know that they know, right? But what's happening in it is this sort of cacophony of, this is the first show where the majority of the characters are in orange, right? They're educated, kind of. They're self-interested. You know, Joey, how you doing, right? They're very much self-motivating, or they're pushing their own agenda as themselves. And then you have Ross, who's sort of, he's anchoring them in kind of the old world. He's literally a paleontologist, right? You don't get much older in the world than that. And then you've got this character, Phoebe, who we've seen in other shows, but in no way has she ever been as far developed. Has this character been as farly developed? Yes, she shows up as green in parts of it, but she really is the first character in a TV show that I can think of who tinges on turquoise, sort of that next level of a we, of, you know, we're all in this thing together. This show's really fascinating. This show does not get deep, right? It does not get very deep because it doesn't have blue and it doesn't have much yellow, which are the things that go deep. This show's a lot of fun, but isn't going to talk about religion in a deep and meaningful way. It's not going to talk about, you know, civic duty in a deep and meaningful way. It's not going to talk about sacrifice in a deep and meaningful way. Then the next one is the greatest television show of all time. I don't know if you know this about me, but I might be the biggest Simpsons nerd that you have ever met. And if you think you have somebody who's a bigger Simpsons nerd than me, we can play the Simpsons Jeopardy game at my house and see how it goes. For a while, Ashley can tell you, in my 20s, I was known for my Simpsons Bible study. I had a Simpsons and the Ten Commandments Bible study that I did in all 4 time zones in the U.S. I love to talk about the Simpsons and religion. It is a postmodern look at the world of yellow people with 4 fingers that speaks a truth to humanity more than most shows with non-yellow people with 5 fingers, right? It is a juxtaposition of what happens when a red idiot is the patriarch of a family and everyone else is more evolved than he is. It is a classic example of the patriarch in red and the wife who's in blue. She's very diligent in her following through on church, and she is a huge enabler of his alcoholism, right? She pretends like everything's okay when it's not. And then you have Bart, who Barbara Bush told you not to watch this show because he was a bad influence, right? Because Barbara Bush is as blue as any person in the history of the United States of America. And for her, the idea of a sarcastic, talking back son was horrendous, let alone that the father needed talking back to, right? I'm going to pause here for a second. Eric, would you walk around with both of your things? This is Eric. He's assisting us today. If you would like a refresher, Pastor Katie's in the back. Pastor Katie, have you ever seen Spiral Dynamics before or talked about it anywhere? No. So give her a handout at least. She's probably not going to pick up everything that we're doing here, but it'll help you. For those of you online and those of you in the room, you can still join this as a group on Church Center. If you join the group and go to the Resources tab, you'll see everything that I posted. There's 7 or 8 things. There's TED Talks about Spiral Dynamics. There's the test that you can take, and there's all kinds of resources there. And I've been putting slides up, except Canva. I got in trouble with Canva because you're not allowed to have more than 100 slides in a slide deck, which is not a problem I've had until we did this Bible study, so I had to start a new slide deck. So I'll get all that up pretty soon, and you can have all these slides if you'd like. Lisa, of course, is very green. She is so much more evolved than her family, and her lines in every single episode are her struggle with being green with a red father and a blue mother and an orange brother and a baby, right? This show writes itself, but except that the dialogue is so witty, it is so pithy, it is so perfect. There's just not a show out there that competes in the level of wittiness of this. There are more one-liners that you missed in this show than any other show, and it's not even close. Lisa the vegetarian is season 5. Lisa the Vegetarian, sort of a classic episode where she becomes woke to the problem of the family and how they eat meat, and meat is murder. And she goes cancel culture on Homer's barbecue, right? That mean green. She tries to convince everyone to eat borscht, which they're not going to do. They showed up to a barbecue, right? And then she takes the pig and, runs away. I mean, like the whole thing. She ends up talking to the Beatles, right? Paul McCartney at the end. She talks to Apu and Paul McCartney about being green and what it's like being green, and it's awesome. Any Simpsons episode is a master's course in spiral dynamics, because even though they didn't have the language of spiral dynamics, they unwittingly made a family that was fighting it all the time. Awesome. My son demanded that I put this show in, which is totally a great show. Obvious. I'm probably giving Jim Halbert way too much credit here. But in his finer moments, he does bring in yellow into the conversation. I often think of all the times when he does like the Office Olympics, when he brings people together, he does that really, really well. When there's a fire drill and they're all outside, and he's got to like have them talk through, he's sort of killing time. He's the classic I can kill time but make it meaningful kind of guy. Obviously, Michael Scott is a real big failure at Orange, but still can't give it up, right? He cannot give up Orange, even though he's really bad at it. He's really bad at it. And yet great at it at the same time, right? Such a classic character. Oscar is so green, he walks around judging everybody all the time, can't help himself. Angela and Dwight are the 2 red characters in The Office. Angela walks around condemning everyone for their sexual exploits and has not 1 but 2 affairs, right, in the show. Oster walks around condemning everybody and has an affair in the show, right? Classic show. This was an early season. We don't have Andy in it, but Andy represents the blue world, and he's trying desperately to be orange, but he can't. He's so unevolved. Everywhere he goes, he tells you where he went to college, which is a very blue thing to do, right? But also, he's a terrible salesman, right? He's a terrible salesman, and that's because he's stuck in blue, but he's convinced himself that he can survive in orange, and he's terrible at it. He's trying to please his parents. Pam is the classic good character. Way too often we make the cute female blue, right? We've done this now in every one of them. We've made the wife character in every show blue. That does not match reality, but it certainly helps with the spiral. Notice that Dwight is easily the antagonist, right, in this show at all times. Everything is about how strong he is, and he's 80% of all attacks are from behind. Well, what if somebody attacks you from the front? Well, then I would stop him, and then then Jim slaps him, right? We love that banter, and obviously Spiral Dynamics is behind that. Last but certainly not least, we have the show that is the newest. It's really not the newest, it's over now. But it's the one that pushes us the furthest into green in a lot of ways. It's the most evolved. These are the most educated individuals in any of the TV shows, right? Think about how often they make fun of Howard for only having a master's degree. So it should be of no surprise that they are much higher evolutionarily than the others, except Sheldon, who is convinced that he is easily the most evolved, and he is still the least evolved, which is the premise of every single episode, right? He is red, operating under an orange system in a green friend group. That is every single episode. He is easily the instigator. The instigator in every one of these shows is pretty much red, and that holds true across the board in most of our shows. I would love for you to find for me a TV show where the instigator, I'm not going to call them good or bad, the instigator is not a red character. I literally could not think of one. Hope you enjoyed that. Did you know some of those shows? Surely we hit something that you knew there. All right. Are you ready? We've been waiting for this. Are you ready to talk about a green Jesus? Oh wait, that's from last week. A green Jesus. Are you ready? Are you excited? All right, you've been hearing me talk about, there's a lot of warning signs for green. I think you've got those, so I'm not going to go over those again. But we're going to talk about how Jesus shows up in green, far more evolved than the people he's talking to, in a series of episodes in Matthew's gospel. Now, one of the things that I resist doing as a Bible study teacher is giving you a lot of lines of text, because it's when people eyes glaze over. Today we have to go text heavy because this is the end of the class. Next week is the last class. We're going to go back to the beginning of Matthew and talk about the Magi just in time for Advent. Funny how I planned that. But this is going to talk about several chapters in a row where Jesus is picking up steam, okay? This is the end of his ministry. In every gospel, the things Jesus says right before he's arrested are the thing that kind of get him arrested, right? If you're following Aristotelian's plot structure, and I did a whole Bible study, hour-long lecture about Aristotelian plot structure and why you shouldn't trust it in the gospel lessons. That is way too adult for this because this is being live streamed. But if you want to know why we think a good story is, setting, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement, that's Aristotelian plot structure. You were told that's what a good story is. We can talk about that, but separately. But in the context of this, Jesus is ramping up on that rising action, and of course the climax of his gospel is going to be the death on the cross, and then the falling action, the denouement. This is that very rising action, okay? And it is so green, it is dripping. I mean, Jesus could be glowing green in this, once you understand spiral dynamics. So, here's what I'd like to do. Eric's got the microphone. I would love it if some of y'all would volunteer to read. Danny, would you read for me? All right. And then if you're willing to read, just go take the microphone from Danny. We got like 10 of these, okay? And I just don't want you to keep having to listen to my voice. We're starting here with Jesus, who's green, talking to his disciples who are blue at best. At best, they are blue. Go ahead.
The yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. When they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. "Be careful," Jesus said to them. "Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." They discussed this among themselves and said, "It is because we didn't bring any bread." Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, "You of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread?"
You're supposed to read slower than that, Danny.
I'm very sorry. Slow down.
All right, thank you. All right, so Jesus is saying, be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees. And what do the disciples say? This is about bread. Is it about bread? Say no. No. So then Jesus has to explain himself. Would somebody else take the mic? Give it to Andrew. Sorry, introvert.
Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Are you feeling this? Do you feel the spiral dynamic conversation that's happening here? Somebody say, yeah. Yeah, you feel that? It cracks me up. When we do our preaching on Sundays, we leave out some of these texts. You've never heard this read, but it's so good. I think it's a riot. He's like, seriously, guys, seriously. Somebody else, microphone. Candy.
Do you still not understand? Don't you remember?
Let's go to the next one. That's my fault.
After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. "For whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" "Well, from others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take that first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4-drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours."
Thank you, Candy. So this story cracks me up. How many of you know this story? They asked for his tax, and Peter's like, "My Jesus pays taxes." And then Jesus is like, "Damn it, Peter, why did you do that? Why did you say that?" And he's like, "Well, now we got to pay taxes because you told them we were going to," right? So then notice that in this scenario, Jesus tries not to offend, right? He even says, so not to cause offense, he finds some money, right? He finds the money for it. This is a very green solution. You could argue that this is actually turquoise, right? But Peter is not on the same, they are not on the same level. And what the disciples continue to miss is that Jesus is far more evolved than they are. All right, somebody else, maybe Josh? He's over here in the white behind you.
If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through who they come. If your hand or foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than for you to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 and be thrown into eternal fire of hell.
Yeah, obviously you've heard me say many, many, many times, the word here is definitely not hell. Hell is an English word. Jesus did not speak English. Definitely not the word he uses. It's completely a terrible translation. Anybody who says that should go to, well, I'm not going to say. That was a bad joke. But the point here is, this is not a literal thing that Jesus is telling you to do. We know this because it would be completely inconsistent with the life and teaching and miracles of Jesus of Nazareth. Nowhere does Jesus go to somebody and rip off their arm. Nowhere does Jesus go somewhere and take out their eye. Exactly the opposite. He goes and he gives people sight. He lets the lame walk, right? Jesus is about a ministry of healing, but his teaching here is a very deconstructionist version of green, where he's saying it is so hard for you to not sin that it would actually be better if you didn't have that body part, because then you wouldn't be able to sin. This is a very green statement here. And it blows my mind that people read this literally and think that what Jesus, I actually have never met somebody who's literally done this, right? Gouged their eye out or cut their arm off. But there are many people who think that Jesus' teachings are literal when they are figurative. They think that this is in red, and it's not. This is in green. That's the difference. All right, Matthew 18. So this has all been 16 to 17. Has these three parables. First one is the shepherd who leaves the 99 going for the one. The reckless love of God. He tells it very different. He tells it different. Luke tells this parable much better, which is why we pretty much don't say it in the Matthew version. We only say the Luke version. But the parable of the wandering sheep is there, which is like, God cares about you. God cares about the one. God cares about one. And actually, he talks about value. There's like a money part to it here. And then the second thing in Matthew 18 is this thing about when two people gather in my name, I will be with them. You notice I made the first one orange to remind me to tell you it's actually it's a little bit about a money thing, right? Of course, if you have 99 sheep, but you lost one, your stock's still down, bro. You got to go get your stock up, right? You got to go get that last sheep. You got to rise and grind and go do the next thing. And then in blue, where two or more are gathered, blue people love it when you say when two or more are gathered, because we often feel the love and grace of Jesus when we are together. We are social beings. When we are together and we share a meal, our blood pressure goes down. When we're together and we hold hands, we have better clarity. We have less anxiety. We have less depression. We have more gratefulness, more mindfulness. We're more likely to be in the moment around each other than alone. We get less out of our feedback loops and less out of our default mode networks, and we actually be. Being gathered in God's name is really important. There's also the office of the keys is in this part here, which gave the church way too much power in its pretty bad interpretation of that particular text. And then you get to orange again with the story, the parable of the unmerciful servant. Do you know how this one goes? There's a servant, and his master forgives his debt. And then he goes out, and he refuses to forgive anybody's debt who owes him money. So he's been given grace, and he responds to that with a stinginess, sort of an angry stinginess. Okay, the forgiveness of debts is fairly green, right? The president of the United States right now is very blue and very green, right? And he keeps flirting with the idea of forgiving student loan debt. He's not going to, but he's going to flirt with it for at least 3 more years, right? Not going to happen, right? But all of the loan forgiveness that's happening, all of the stimulus, I get a check for $750 every month now because the earned income tax, the child tax credit has gone up. And they give that to you monthly now. I didn't even know they could do that. Apparently they can, and they do. Not complaining. I'm just saying that's a very green thing to do. Forgiveness of debt is a green thing, right? Because it's canceling the debt. Canceling's a big part of being green. But for this particular servant, he has his debt canceled in green, and then he goes all red on the people that owe him money. And when that happens, the master comes back to him at the end and says, well, if you're going to be in red, I got to treat you like you're in red. And then he strings him up by his toes or something. That's in the Greek. It's a little bit different. Guido comes in and they break his ankles. It's in the Greek, but so that's a really interesting story. Now, consider how these stories are growing on each other. This parable of the unmerciful servant comes right after this that we just read about how if your eye causes you to sin, cast it out. These things are incongruent unless you understand that Jesus in green is deconstructing the worldview in which you've been brought up, okay? The Jewish worldview of all the laws still had on the books, if a woman commits adultery, she should be stoned in the streets, right? This is what we're going to talk about next week with Joseph, who's supposed to stone Mary when he finds out she's pregnant, right? But there's a big difference between the laws on the books and the laws in practice, right? There are very few Jewish people today who keep kosher, and we call them extreme Orthodox, right? Because it's actually a really hard thing to do. I was friends with a rabbi in Winston-Salem, and we met at the barbecue joint. And I always ordered chicken, and after a while, he's like, you can eat pork in front of me. And I was like, oh, thank God. Because the barbecue was perfect. But there are so few people who actually followed the rigorous laws of Leviticus, of the Levitical code. There's so few people who actually did that. But there were many in Jesus' day, and they were called Pharisees, right? And so they were walking around judging the world in blue. And so what Jesus is responding to, figuratively, is the literalism of the Pharisees who are judging everybody for not getting it right, okay? So the laws, stick with me, the laws of Leviticus are red. If you do this, you die. If you do this, you die. If you do that, you die. If you menstruate, you need to be gone for a month. If you, have a, on and on, right? Those are a bunch of rules that are in red. The Pharisees and all those who enact those rules and force those rules on you, even when they no longer make sense, is blue. Are you with me? The disciples are blue at best, and Jesus is green. So when Jesus says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, what he's really saying is deconstructing the way that the Pharisees in blue have been interpreting the red laws. Does that make sense? I hope so, because I've been trying really hard to figure out how to say that to you. It's not literal, it's figurative. But the way that it makes sense is when you understand that he's deconstructing the way that the blue people have run their red laws. All right. Then this parable of the unrepentant servant is a green story of how a guy in red refuses to take grace that he's been given and pay it forward. He keeps it all for himself, and he doesn't evolve. And then the parable says that the owner goes back to the servant and says, fine, if you want to be red, I'm going to treat you in red. He brings karma to the situation. Karma is not green or yellow or turquoise. It is not an advanced system. Karma is blue. Karma is red. Karma is purple. Karma is orange. Karma does not exist in the upper stratus because we know from God's unconditional love for us that love must be unconditional. Unconditional is not karma. It is better than you deserve. It is better than you deserve. God treats you better than you deserve. Every single time. God forgives you before you ask. God gives you a life. God gives you love. God gives you everything. Everything you have belongs to God, and it's not in that karma thing. But it's a parable. And so what the parable is there to do in green is deconstruct blue and deconstruct red. It's not there to say, this is the moral way that you should treat somebody. It's not saying, if you're the master, if you're the parent, and you forgive your child, or you refrain from hitting your child, and then they hit somebody else, that you go back to that child and say, fine, now I'm going to hit you. That would be a red way to read this parable. This parable is not a red parable, it's a green parable. And so what he's doing is deconstructing. Are you with me? A little bit? Have I lost you? All right, I know that was kind of a lot. All right. This part is a really interesting phrase in Matthew's gospel. I have taught on this before about 3 years ago in the very first Wine and Word session. So I know you have all of my lectures just memorized. So sorry if this is some review, but this is called the eunuch saying in Matthew's gospel, chapter 19. In chapter 19, we have Jesus, where his words are green, but the way Matthew writes about him is red. Okay? Because Matthew can't understand green. And so in it, we have 4 sections in a row where Jesus shows up as an alpha. Jesus shows up as a man's man, right? The most interesting man in the world. Okay? 4 times in a row, he lays the smack down, except he doesn't do it in the violent way. He does it in the nonviolent way, which if you understand evolution, you understand nonviolent power is far stronger than violent power. Ask Gandhi. Ask Nelson Mandela. Ask Dr. King. Ask Jesus. Nonviolent power is a willingness of other people to give you power. Violent power is a willingness to hurt people if they don't follow you. So in it, we have these 4 stories. Quickly, the first one in Matthew 19 is a teaching about divorce. They come up and say to Jesus, hey, can we get divorced because we're tired of each other? Jesus says, no. And they're like, but Moses let us get divorced. He goes, that's because you suck. It's in the Greek. The second story, think about that. They're going up to Jesus, who's not married, and asking him to be authoritative on their marriage, okay? You feel that power dynamic. That, in red, that's a huge power dynamic. Second thing that happens, a rich man comes up to Jesus and says, I'm awesome. What else should I do to have eternal life? Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbors yourself. I've been doing that since I was a baby, the guy says. Jesus says, all right, fine. Sell everything you want and come follow me. Give up your masculinity. Give up your power. Give up your rights to property and land. Give up your swagger. Give up your life. Give up your manhood and come be, excuse the male-female binary, but this is intended in the text, not intended in my deconstruction of that text. Jesus says, come be my woman. That's basically what he's telling them, okay? Give up your manhood, give up all your power, rich man, and come follow me. I'm your alpha. And the rich man goes away crying. Do you think that's a highly masculine trait in the first century? No. Weeping. The third thing is the eunuch saying, which I'm going to get to in a minute. The fourth thing is a bunch of children want to come to Jesus. And the disciples are like, get these kids out of here. And Jesus is like, no, let the little children come to me. But when he does that, it feels like he's putting his disciples down and favoring children over him, which is also an alpha move. Do you feel that, right? He's so next level. Jesus is so next level. All 4 of these things. And this is the eunuch saying, this is in the middle. This is right after the rich man comes and walks away angry. And Jesus says, give up everything and come follow me. Who's got the mic? Would one of y'all in that middle section be willing to read the eunuch saying? All right. Do you know the eunuch saying? A little bit? All right. I think it's on.
Already on? Okay.
Yeah.
Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can.
How many of you have heard this before? Be honest. A couple. We do not talk about the eunuch saying very often, do we? It's pretty uncomfortable. It is a literal giving up of your manhood. Not figuratively. Except what Jesus is using here is figurative. Talking about taking away a man's manhood is the highest level of deconstruction that one could have. Right? And he says, the disciples are saying, Jesus, aren't we so good? That rich man had everything, and he walked away. He couldn't follow you. And Jesus says, yeah, you are good. You're eunuch. You are good because you have chosen to be a eunuch and follow me. That's intense. That's some intense language. You have given up your physical manhood in order to follow me. There are eunuchs who have made eunuchs from birth, made eunuchs by other people, right? Of course, a eunuch was a very powerful person in the world, but they could never have the ultimate power. They could never be king or queen, but they could always be the aid to the queen, right? They were always beta to the alpha. And so Jesus, this is an amazing parable, amazing part of deconstruction, and it happens here. Can you feel that we are ramping up to Jesus as total alpha? You're going to kill him on a cross, and he's going to come back from the dead. There's nothing more alpha than that. The amazing thing about the cross story is it works in every color in the spectrum, right? Every color in the spiral. Red looks at the cross, and they're like, man, they gave him pain, and he's still strong. Blue's like, man, he sacrificed everything. Orange is like, man, I hope this guy comes back because this was a risky venture. Green is looking at it and saying, man, he is deconstructing what power looks like. So our theology influences our place on the spiral influences our theology. All of that was preamble to what I really want to talk about today. And that is the worst parable period ever. Period. Are you ready for the worst parable of all time? I think you know this one. I need somebody to read. All right. Worst parable ever.
For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon, and at about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage.
Keep going.
Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.
All right, how many of you know this parable? How many of you, this parable grinds your gears in every single way? Yeah, yeah. How many of you love, love, love this parable? Look at these green people all over the place. Yeah. This parable is the crux. This is the crux of the gospel for me. I think this is the hardest thing to preach on in all of Scripture. And in fact, I super judge other preachers on how they preach this text. This is the ultimate routine. This is the hardest thing to preach on. And it's because your congregation is all across the spectrum of spiral dynamics. And you could say what you love about this, and you're just going to cheese off half your people. And if you can't explain your way through it, I'm telling you, this is the most difficult routine that there ever could be. And I think you should judge all preachers based on how they can preach this text. Obviously, this is the worst parable ever, but it's also the best. It hits us right where we are, and it is an easily translatable way for us to talk in parable about how in the modern world we view our world and our finances and our labor practices. And so today, as Jesus, who's in green, we are going to deconstruct all of the meta-narratives of how you think about finance and where people ought to be in their working lives. Are you excited? All right. So the question then is, how do the different colors interpret this parable? We're going to start with purple at the bottom of the spiral. Obviously not beige, but purple. How would a purple pastor preach? That's some alliteration for you. On this parable. How would a purple pastor preach on this parable? Okay. When you work, you get compensated. I don't think purple would say that yet. I think purple would say some people are more highly favored than others. That's actually what happens in Luke chapter 2. Mary says, I am highly favored, right? The story of Job, right, is purple. His friends come up and they're like, what did you do to make God angry? And Job's like, I didn't do anything. And they're like, yes, you did. Yes, you did, because some people God favors and some God doesn't favor. I think that's how purple would interpret this text. How about red? How would red interpret this text? It's my money. It's none of your business. Right. The master of the house would say, this is my money. It's none of your business what I do with my money. That's mine. I earned it. It's my vineyard. Right? My great-grandfather dug the holes for this, what am I talking about? How the water comes in, what's that called? My grandfather irrigated this with nothing but a hand trowel. This is my vineyard. This is my money, and I can do whatever I want with it, right? If this person... Yeah. Yeah. The way Red would look at this story is, this is a story of warning. This is a parable that you should be careful because people are lazy and what they want to do is take advantage of you. Think about how this finds its way into our world, into our meta-narratives. If we saw this story in real life, we would think, in red, we would think, people do not want to work. People are lazy. And you should only pay people for the work that they do. I think red would call this the worst parable ever. I mean, if it's trying to teach us something, it's teaching us that laziness should be rewarded. which goes against everything red believes in. Red believes that the strong survive. All right, how would blue read this story? All right, blue, Josh says, we're all in this together. Yeah, yes, and I have heard blue preach on this parable poorly by saying, some things are just too difficult for us to understand. Why would God, have this parable where somebody gets paid for labor that they didn't do? That really flies in the face of a lot of the red-blue world. And so blue would read this parable as, God's crazy. God's reckless. It's a reckless love of God. But the blue pastor would preach on this. The blue preacher would preach, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. And that's probably all they could wrap their mind around in any deep way. And I'm not trying to be disparaging. I'm telling you, I've heard this sermon before, preached by somebody in blue who said, I think what this parable is about is the last should be first and the first shall be last. How would orange preach this parable? Every mega church in the country, how would they preach this parable? What? Yeah, all you got to do is believe and get in. Yep. Listen, it doesn't matter how bad you've been in your life. You can turn it around, right? If you pray at the last minute, God's a chump, and you can get your way. I have also heard Orange preach, including me, because I live in Orange a lot. It's the worst parable ever. Seriously. It's just terrible. What do you mean? What do you mean that you're going to pay the guy who didn't show up in the marketplace until 3 o'clock the same that you gave the guy at the beginning? You do not know how to run a business at all. Are you even trying? Are you trying to not provide for your family? Do you not care if they go to college? Clearly you don't. Clearly you shouldn't be running your own business at all. I'm all for treating people fairly and paying them fairly, don't get me wrong, but we agreed on a price. And why would I go above and beyond that? All you're trying to do is raise people to be lazy. You know what's going to happen tomorrow? There's going to be no one at 6 a.m. You get what you pay for. Congratulations. You're going to get a bunch of people work for an hour and a half tomorrow. If you look away from people for a minute, they will slack off, and it's going to cost you. It's going to cost your bottom line. It's going to cost your board of investors. It's going to cost everybody who ever trusted in you, and you will never get a job again. That's the way our world works, right? This is our society. What I just told you could have come out of the mouth of virtually every CEO on the planet, right? All your bosses are out there saying, you can't work from home because how do I know you're working? And you're like, well, because I measure output and not input. And all you care about is how many hours I work because that's the only thing you can measure. But it's a really dumb thing for you to track. Because I can get a project done in 5 minutes. It takes my coworker 3 hours to do the same project, so I get mine done in 5 minutes, and then I work on my fantasy football team for 2 hours and 55 minutes, and you pay us both the same, right? You pay us both the same. Hourly rate is a horrible metric if what you're actually trying to track is output. Somebody say amen. It is a dumb system, and the only reason we do it is because it's easy to track. Well, it's actually easy to lie about too, right? Well over half of all employees lie about the hours that they work. Everybody who tells you that they work 70 hours works 50. Everybody tells you they work 50 works 30, right? That is what I'm telling you, right? I'm telling you that the attention span of a human being does not go longer than an hour. It does not go longer than an hour. There are some jobs where you have to be hourly. Obviously, if you work at Starbucks, you can't, put in some hard hours and then not. You got to be there the whole time. But for a lot of jobs, it's about output. And actually, I am not sure that you lose a lot of efficiency in this job if somebody worked really hard for an hour and a half. Amazon is pushing the limits of how hard people can work in an 8-hour shift, right? But they have a lot of turnover because of it. Orange would say that this is the worst parable ever. This parable flies in the face of everything we believe in as quality Americans. And then there's green. Green thinks this is the best parable ever. Jesus gives us this parable, so we know where he stands. Why does Green like this? What's that? It's a different look at fairness. Okay? Treats everyone the same? What? Are you sure about that, Pat? Because when I read the story of the prodigal son, I'm always the older brother who stayed home. Right? Are you sure? Pat said, we are the people who show up at the end. I think that that's a really great way to read it. And also, sometimes we are the ones who are there first. Sometimes we are the ones who work harder and don't get it. In America, if you woke up white today, you obviously got there late, right? You were given a lot, right? The way I talk about racism, everything can be a football analogy. Everything can be a football analogy. The way I talk about racism is like we're playing football, and you spot me 7 points at the beginning of the game, and you spot me 3 points every quarter, right? It's not how you're playing the game. It's that the game is rigged. The game is rigged from the beginning, right? The way we decide how much money a school gets is based on the property value of the houses that surround that school. Well, the property value that surrounds white schools are white houses who have money. That's an unfair game, et cetera, and et cetera. It goes on and on and on, right? Green is deconstructing the pay scale model of red and blue and orange. Do you feel that? Do you feel that so strong? And I love this line. I mean, this is obviously God. God smacks me in the face with this line every time I read it. Are you envious because I am generous? We're almost done. Yellow says that the world we are striving for is one where everyone has success. This is what you were saying, Mike. And then turquoise would say, the world that we are striving for doesn't need money, wages, or time clocks. That's a good sermon. This one's a good sermon. This one's an okay sermon. This one sucks. This one's inefficacious. This one is just plain wrong. And this one is just plain wrong. I've heard most of these sermons. You probably have too, right? But let us give feedback to those who are leading to tell them what we are ready to do. If we are ready as a congregation to start pushing into yellow, let's do it. Let's not wait for the world. We will all be dead by the time the world gets to yellow. If we want to be there, let's do it. If we want to take where we are as a congregation, which is very green in general, and we want to push on to yellow, let's do it. A number of you taken the test and told me that you show up as yellow and turquoise. God bless you. You make my job so much more fun. Love doing that. We cannot wait for the world to understand Matthew chapter 20. We cannot wait. We will all be dead. But we now have the knowledge and the tools to push forward. And so my prayer for you and your prayer for me is that we find a way to do it. So let's pray. Heavenly Mother, we give you thanks for this time together. We thank you for parables like this that really push us out of the meta-narratives that we've grown up with. We do not believe that other humans are lazier than we are. We do not believe that other humans are worse than we are or less likely to want to work than we are. We do not believe that we are better than anyone else. We do not believe that we deserve more than others. We do not believe that everything we have, we deserve. We know that in this grand scheme of things, we are envious because you are generous. Help us to be generous too. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank y'all for coming. Next week, we're going to put a button on this thing, kind of, but we're always going to be talking about this. I hope we're talking about this 5 years from now. And I'm going to lecture for about half the time. In the second half, we have a pastoral candidate. Her name is Nakia Berryhill, Pastor Nakia Berryhill. We have an opportunity Basically, the synod wants to pay for Christ the King to have a pastor. All we are paying for are benefits. And they really want a pastor who is young and vibrant and a person of color to be a pastor in the Raleigh area. And they can't think of anywhere cooler for that pastor to be than with us. So we get half of a pastor for about a fourth of the price. And also we get a great pastor to do some cool stuff. Pastor Nakia is going to be here next week. I need you to be nice to her. It is hard to be new in a church. It is hard to be a person of color in a church full of white people, okay? I need you to be nice to her. She's going to come up here at the end of the Bible study and say a few words. We are not going to grill her or give her a Q&A. But afterwards, you can come up and ask her a question or two, and let's see if that goes well. Does that sound good? All right. Last week, we're getting ready for Christmas, so I give you full permission. Start putting your lights up. It's been a tough year and a half. All in on Christmas this year. All the way in. Put your lights up. Put your tree up. Do everything you want to do. And we'll see you again next week. God bless you.